Here's Jeff Paterson, our Canucks reporter, and of course the host of Rinkwide Vancouver. How we doing, Jeff?
Yeah, anxious for the Canucks to play another game here. I don't like these
been a while.
3 days between games, but
No.
when you're flying cross-continent, I suppose you kind of have to build that into the schedule. So they'll get back at it on Saturday,
Jeff?
but I'm ready. I'm ready for them to play another game here.
Lack of things to watch, so yeah, that sucks. But actually, it has been such a newsy week. I did need a chance to exhale a little bit here, Jeff. There's been lots going on around the rink.
Lots to chew on outside of the pot pie, is that what you're saying?
That's true. Something like that, yes. Oh.
Yeah, and Jeff, he likes routine. He doesn't like irregularities. 3 days off in the middle of a hockey season is
But
a
then again,
irregularity.
after Saturday, right? They don't play till Tuesday. So.
I know. Sucks.
Yeah.
1 game in 6 days. Oof.
So we're going big picture here, Jeff. We're a couple of games shy of the quarter mark of the season. The Canucks at 9-6-3, a .583 points percentage. By that metric, they would be the first wild card team as it stands right now.
And on top of all that, the roller coaster newsy week.
Yes.
As a backdrop.
Ask you the Surrey Mitsubishi poll question. Are you certain the Vancouver Canucks will make the playoffs?
Boy, certain is such a
That's
a
big
weighty
one.
word in that
Big
poll
word.
question.
Lots of word there.
Look, we've seen the injury issues that this team has gone through. Obviously, the inconsistency, the fact that some of the star players haven't performed at the level that you would like them to. I can't go there and say yes with certainty because I have seen the Vancouver Canucks on those days where they give Quinn Hughes a maintenance day and they practice with the rest of the group on defense, and it gives you an eye to what might that look like if Quinn wasn't available to them. I don't want to scare the viewers and the listeners a whole lot more than that, but it's not a pretty sight. And like one key injury obviously could derail everything. So that's just the reality of pro sports. The Canucks have dealt with a lot of it already. But yeah, I mean, we talked about it briefly, I think, or you guys, I was listening the other day. You know, the saving grace right now is the division, right? Like nobody's pulling away. And so if this is their sluggish 20-game stretch, then yeah, they should be fine. But if this is an indication that they're just going to continue to spin their wheels, like they haven't been able to pull away from a team like Anaheim yet, which is kind of crazy. And even crazier is the fact that the Ducks have more regulation wins than the Edmonton Oilers right now. So, look, the Canucks aren't the only team that's scuffling. We get that. But, yeah, I mean, we keep waiting for them to sort of put this malaise behind them, and then you get news like JT Miller stepping away, dropping on the doorstep, and obviously that's going to make it that much more difficult for the Vancouver Canucks. So fingers crossed that Brock Boeser gets back soon, Thatcher Demko gets back soon, and that Demko can be some semblance of the Thatcher Demko that can be a game breaker and get back to his elite status. But even at that, and we've had enough discussion on this program, until we see it, you know, there's no guarantee that that's the way it goes. So certain that they're a playoff team, I can't go there.
No.
Certainly, I want them to be because it was a ton of fun last year, and you saw the way that the market bought in, and hey, we get to do rink-wide after a bunch of playoff post games, so I want them to be a playoff team, but ultimately it's on them to get out there and get the job done.
We had a couple of listeners this week, Jeff, draw parallels to the 07-08 season. You'll remember the previous year, Alain Vigneault, Roberto Luongo were so fantastic, got them to the playoffs, even won a round. And then in 07-08, the team went through a bunch of, I would suggest, sort of emotional tests. Brendan Morrison's Ironman streak went down. Trevor Linden started being a healthy scratch. It was clear Marcus Naslund was a diminished player. Roberto Luongo had to leave the team. You remember Gina had a complicated pregnancy. There was just a lot. You know, Nonis tried to patch the dam at the trade deadline with like bit parts. There was a lot going on in that season that ultimately the Vancouver Canucks weren't able to overcome. Given what they're looking at with JT Miller now, or an absence that we think is going to be at least the entirety of this road trip, but we shall see. Not to mention like physical injuries that weren't coming up last year, including to the goaltender. Do you see any parallels there? Do you get the sense that this is going to be a test of the Canucks' sort of attitude and emotions as the season goes along?
Yeah, I have time for sort of that debate and discussion. And look, I think we've already seen it, guys, that with Jim Rutherford's famous quote on the eve of last year's training camp about everything going right, and it did, you're just reminded how right so many things went for the Vancouver Canucks, not just on the health front, but the career years for so many players. And we said, like, that's going to be really tough to replicate. And as we sit here right now, the Canucks have, one player who's a point-a-game player, when last year they were lighting up the league. I was looking at this earlier today. They were in Ottawa last year on November the 9th. So a little bit earlier in the month of November, they went out on a road trip. They beat the Senators 5-2. They scored 15 seconds into the hockey game. Brock Boeser's 11th goal of the season on the 9th of November. Philip Hronek had his 14th assist of the season. And as I was reading the recap, it was like Elias Paterson had a goal and 2 assists to take the NHL scoring lead. And you're like, oh yeah, I remember those times. That is not now, right? And so just on so many levels, the way so many guys reached personal highs last year, that's always going to be tough to back up. And so right now, I'm not saying that some other guys couldn't have career years, but they would really have to pick up the slack moving forward. And speaking of picking up the slack, without Miller, it's going to be difficult, not just at 5-on-5, but the power play as well. Certainly Miller and Boeser out of the mix on the power play. That's going to make things that much more challenging. And so then you look to who are the candidates, and it just feels like, we're right back in that position of waiting for Jake DeBrusk to arrive on the scene and start scoring some goals for this hockey club. Like, he could alleviate some of these issues if he was doing what he was brought in to do. It was nice to see Connor Garland score on little sleep, but maybe a step in the right direction, because he was another guy that I think needed something to go his way on the ice. Obviously, he and his wife welcoming their first child, that's something that's going his way off the ice, but he means so much to this team and the way that he plays, and so it was nice to see him fire a puck past Igor Shesterkin the other night. Maybe that'll jumpstart him into a little more productivity, because those are the guys. Like, in the absence of JT Miller, it can't all be on Elias Paterson. It's great that Paterson has sort of come along now, had 8 points on the 6-game homestand, but it's too good a league. You can't just be a one-guy team. Like, ask the Edmonton Oilers how that's working for them with 2 guys that still produce and then nobody else. Like, the Oilers are right back to 2015, 16, 17, 18, it feels like. For the Vancouver Canucks, they need some of those secondary guys now to become primary scorers in the short term here, and we'll see if that can happen starting on Saturday in Ottawa.
We all know that the cavalry, to a degree, is not too far away in Demko and Boeser at the very least. I'll bring up another name. Is any part of you looking forward to Derek Forbort? Because, Desharnais, Jules said, at least it's something kind of new. He's only played 4 games for the Vancouver Canucks. Does Derek Forbort bring something different to the table on the defensive side of things at the very least?
I think he does, Blake, and I'll tell you why. As we learned after the fact, the first of 2 Canucks to take a personal leave in the first 20 games of the season is fairly extraordinary. And then we find out that he left to be with family as his father was passing. So you think about the fact that he played 3 games, his first 3 games for the Vancouver Canucks, with the weight of knowing his father was in his final stages of life. Like, how can you possibly judge a guy in his on-ice performance? And I saw people, he wasn't great, underwhelming. First of all, you're never going to go to the rink and see Derek Forbort be the first star of a hockey game. That's not who he is, right? He's the quintessential stay-at-home defenseman, eat a bunch of pucks, block shots, help the penalty kill. If they're trying to dumb it down, though, right now, and not necessarily put on a show out on the road, I do think that there is a role for Derek Forbort just to come in here, veteran presence, sort of settle things down. It's not about flash at this point. And we know that other guys haven't been getting the job done. So, change would probably be a good thing for the Vancouver Canucks, just inserting him in the lineup. The one game he played since his leave was in San Jose. It was against the Sharks. It's hard to judge anybody against that opponent. But remember, that was the night that Brandstrom slid over and played the right side, and Forbort was the left-sider on the third pair. And so, I'd be intrigued to see more of that, I suppose, but also maybe you pair him with Tyler Myers. Just, again, a little bit of a change here, because that's the one thing for me, guys, is as much as Soucy and Myers haven't been very good. We know that. The numbers reflect that. And there were a lot of players that haven't necessarily pulled their weight through 19 games, but I also think Rick Tocchet's stubbornness to not break that pairing up is costing his hockey club. And, he's willing to move other pieces around. He's willing to bench JT Miller when things aren't going well. But why in the world will he not separate Myers and Soucy when it seems like it's costing them on a nightly basis, and then the coach just keeps coming out and saying they got to dig in and eventually they're going to get it? They're 20 games in And I'm not so sure that it's going to get a whole lot better for those two. So having Forbort in and available at some point here out on the road trip, I don't think he can hurt the hockey club. Again, is he a savior? No, I wouldn't go to that length. But I do think that it's basically like starting over this season, right? For Forbort, just given all that he's been through, I kind of feel like whenever he gets back in the lineup, it's going to be like game one. And then we can start judging what he can bring to this mix.
That one game sample size, almost 9 minutes at even strength of Forbort and Brandstrom, and they were 56% Corsi, though they were pretty good.
I'm glad you made the distinction and answered the question as you did, Jeff, because, I mean, he's a 43% career Corsi, Blake. Forbort to the rescue?
Have you seen the rest of this?
Are we at that stage?
Yes.
Holy
yes,
cow.
that's where we are at.
Jeff, how do you think the team will respond? We've got a little bit of evidence, the one game, but how do you think the team will respond to JT Miller's absence?
Yeah, I mean, you hope that they sort of rally the troops here and it can galvanize them. I mean, that's the only hope that you can have, that if they throw their hands in the air and think, oh boy, our heart and soul guy is stepping away, we don't stand a chance. Look at this road trip, guys, from Ottawa to Boston to Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Detroit. I mean, the first 5 games are all there for the taking. It finishes in Minnesota, and that's going to be difficult given the way that the Wild have started this season, the way Kirill Kaprizov is playing. But these first 5 games, like, there are opportunities, and I really do feel like I don't want to overstate the importance of the first game here, but setting the tone for the trip here against the Senators team that lost last night to Vegas, has lost 4 in a row, has 4 wins in 13 games. And I get that Travis Green's on the other side. He's going to want to dig in, and he's going to want his team to dig in, and we'll see if they play any harder for the coach because it's his former team. But it just sort of feels like this could be a big swing game right off the bat here. It didn't work for them at home. They're out on the road where they have had success, but in saying that, 6 straight wins, just to remind people that they've won their last 6 road games, but they are wins over the Ducks and the Sharks and the Blackhawks and the Flyers. The win in Los Angeles was good, and Florida, the defending champs, even without Tkachuk and Barkov, that was still a good, I thought, performance by the Vancouver Canucks. So they've played some solid hockey away from home. You just wonder, I mean, sometimes getting away from the home rink and the home fans and everything else, get out on the road and just see if you can't sort of get back to doing what you did well earlier in the season. But it's JT Miller. We're talking about a 103-point guy, an all-star, and truly the sort of heartbeat of this team when he's on, and one of the few guys that can drag this group into the fight. So nobody's replacing JT Miller. I just think, as Rick Tocchet always says, 5 or 10% more from just about everybody across the board. And if they could get a win in Ottawa to set the tone for the trip, then you bounce on to Boston and see if you can back that up against a Bruins team that's made the coaching switch. They're going to hope that they're on a bit of an upswing now, but still, obviously, it's been a struggle for the Boston Bruins out of the gate so far this season.
Yeah, and I did Ottawa radio this morning, 4 in a row. They are kind of at a season pivot point here, and that could be an ordinary crowd on the home team if they were to get behind early tomorrow.
Do you like the road, though, for them right now for the Canucks overall?
Yeah, I just think people can't get fooled into, 6-1, they're on the road, this is where they make it happen. Again, I think they've taken advantage of favorable scheduling and some lesser opponents. But when I look at, their most recent road game was the one in Los Angeles. It feels like a lifetime ago. That was the night Boeser left, obviously. But they did play well that night. And I still think 19 games in, that one would rank pretty high on the complete performance scale for the Vancouver Canucks. There haven't been enough of them. So, can they take that blueprint with them out on the road here? Kevin Lankinen should be rested. I don't know if he starts on Saturday, but he had the last game off and so hasn't played since last Sunday. They do have to back off his schedule a little bit here, and so we'll see how they go with the goaltending decision out on this road trip. There is the one back-to-back there. But yeah, I do think that for whatever reasons, it hasn't happened for them at Rogers Arena, and if they can just kind of leave the home ice troubles behind, road is where the success has been so far this season, so maybe it will help them find some good vibes here as they start things off against the Sens on Saturday night.
And Boeser in a non-contact jersey practicing with his teammates is a great sign.
It doesn't sound like tomorrow, but
no, but Tuesday sounds
with that time
doable.
off again after tomorrow before possibly Tuesday. And so that's where the schedule does kind of work in their favor.
He was asked some pointed questions about it this week. Tocchet was. is tomorrow Soucy and Myers' last stand if they struggle again as a pair?
Well, I mean, I'm past that point, and that's why I say, like, I don't think. I mean, Rick Tocchet had.
You're past it, Jeff, but he isn't. He gave this long answer about, like they were, and he ended with, and they were good in the playoffs for us last year. And I'm sitting there going, okay, Rick, we're in a new season here. There hasn't been much good through 18 games.
We talked about it at the time. Like, their underlyings in the playoffs were terrible. Now they faced McDavid and Draisaitl an awful lot in the Edmonton series. Their success came in keeping those two guys to the perimeter and doing a nice job of limiting the true high danger chances. But I mean, the Oilers had the puck in the Canucks' own most of the time. That, like, all Soucy and Myers could do was prevent, and then finally, flip the puck high to center ice and race to the bench to get off the ice and let somebody else have a go. So I do think Rick Tocchet has to be careful here if he's going to continually point to playoff success. Like, you're right. Like, we're 8 months removed. We're 20 games into this season. Every season is its own new act here, and for whatever reasons, it's just not working. And more, it seems, for Soucy than it is for Myers, which is kind of wild. When, like, I don't think Rick Tocchet was asked a single question about Carson Soucy last year, other than when's he coming back from his couple of injuries. But he was as low maintenance as they came. Just got out there, did his thing, did it relatively effectively, and just it wasn't a fire that Tocchet had to pay any attention to. And this year, my goodness, it's just a 180-degree turn here. So.
And Jeff, that was a good thing. That he wasn't being asked about Soucy last year was a great thing.
Soucy would show up, do his job, and that was that. Yep. There were other areas of concern. This is why I say, like, Rick Tocchet had the Midas touch last year. He was coach of the year for a reason. Like, everything he touched, it seemed, turned to gold. And yet this year, you can say he overplayed Lankin a little bit. You can point to the fact that he just continues to run Soucy and Myers out there together. Obviously, a little bit of a clash with JT Miller there before Miller took his leave. Like, already in the first 20 games, it feels like Rick Tocchet has had a few more issues this year than he did at any point last year. So, is this life in the NHL? Is the honeymoon over? I mean, I think it's fair to ask all those questions. I still think Rick Tocchet's a really good coach, and I enjoy dealing with the guy and learning from him on a daily basis. But I do think it's not just all on the ice, that he has to look himself in the mirror and think, like, there are some nights where maybe he hasn't pushed the right buttons to help this team get over the hump on certain nights on the schedule.
I do think, though, like, a defensive player like Soucy can go through slumps in the same way an offensive player has a power outage and doesn't score goals. Like, to me, the fact that Soucy's been so consistent over the last handful of years in and out of a Canuck uniform, maybe this is just a bad spell. Like, I don't know that this is the beginning of the end for Carson Soucy necessarily. Like, this could be eminently recoverable for a guy like Soucy, no?
Yeah, well, you hope so. I think the flip side of that coin, though, is that everybody looked at Tyler Myers last year and thought, oh my goodness, like, Adam Foote's a miracle worker. Look what they've done. They've got Tyler Myers back. For last season, yeah. But again, he's a year older now. His partner isn't helping him as much. And so where is that magic, that synergy that Adam Foote had with a guy like Tyler Myers? Again, I think on that pair, it feels like this year the loud mistakes have been made more by Soucy than they have by Tyler Myers. But I just think at this stage of his career, Tyler Myers isn't able to mop up some of those mistakes that Soucy is making the way that maybe he did earlier, or the way that somebody has done for him at other times in his career. So for whatever reason, those two are not in lockstep. But you're right. Like, I'm not writing Carson Soucy off as an NHL player. I have to think that there is a way out of this, but that's where, it's on the player, obviously, but it's on the coaching staff. And sometimes, like, if it's just not working, like, you change your forward lines all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So why not for a game or two even? You can go back. Like, that's the thing about changing combinations. You can always go back.
It's not legislated. You're right.
But if it's not working... Like, coaches are in such a rush to break up forward combinations. Like, why wouldn't you step in here at some point and just take a look at some different pairings on defense?
Last question from me, Jeff, but Daily Faceoff has dropped their new trade target board. There's a ton of defensemen on the board. Have we talked Marcus Paterson in the past? I'm not sure we have. And then Michael Matheson in Montreal. I just want to get your sense about Patch in the dam here, how quickly you think it's going to come, this top four defenseman add. Of course, it was 51 weeks ago, November 30th, when they added Nikita Zadorov. So how anxious do you think they are, and which of these names do you think most attracts if we are in for a redux and a patching the dam on the blue line?
Yeah, my sense, and I haven't had access to Patrick Allvin, on the record here for a little while, but my sense is like they've taken such steps to stay out of LTR to accrue as much cap space. I just don't see them spending on Black Friday here. Like I think they're waiting until closer to the deadline. There'll be other sales down the line, although maybe they won't like the sale prices. But it kind of feels counter to what they have done every day on the cap to this point to go and make a big splash where you're waiting to see Thatcher Demko. Can you get the elite Thatcher Demko, the difference maker Thatcher Demko back? Does that settle things down? Does that make Carson Soucy and Tyler Myers better? And it probably does. If the real Thatcher Demko finds his form, then it probably makes all the defensemen that much better in front. I think they want to see, can they get through this stretch without JT Miller? So my sense is that they're going to try to ride this out. Again, they're not really losing a lot of ground in the division race. And I think they learned from last year, guys, that winning the division, 50 wins on 109 points, it was fun. It was different, obviously. But in the end, they had home ice against the Oilers. And how did that work for them? I think it's way more about being playoff prepared this time around and hitting your stride. We know that Jim Rutherford likes to jump the market and all those types of things. They did it last year with Zadorov, and they did it with Lindholm as well. I do think they're going to be active, but I think that they're building up this war chest, and they're not probably prepared to spend it now when they've got some pieces, important pieces, waiting in the wings that they hope will get back here, and maybe this team can solidify and start to take shape that way. So, the names that you mentioned there, like, has enough water gone under the bridge yet that Mike Matheson would be welcomed into a Canuck camp?
I wondered that earlier this week, actually.
Like, chemistry is a thing.
I think so.
Plants Elias Paterson, the rookie Elias Paterson, on his head, essentially, in Florida, and got suspended for it. But it happened. And on some level, it would be a little odd to bring him into the mix here. And there's been so much smoke around Marcus Paterson now that you can't ignore it, at the very least. And I don't think it's going to get a whole lot better in Pittsburgh. So I do think that Kyle Dubas is going to get active here. We saw the Lars Eller move. Did that signal, the first of many for the Penguins? Wouldn't surprise me. We're getting to that U.S. Thanksgiving here this week where, always feels like such an important sort of date or week on the NHL schedule for teams to take stock of where they are. I just think that this group is going to kick it down the road a little bit before it makes the big splash, as opposed to opportunity presented itself. We know Zadorov wanted out. He had made it clear in Calgary last year. Canucks saw an opportunity to pounce. I think it's a little different circumstance this time around. And again, as long as they can tread water and hang with the pack, if they start to fall off the pace, maybe that changes the calculus a little bit for Allvin and company. But I think in the here and now, if they can hold her on this road trip, they come back home, they got another 6-game homestand, which in theory should be exciting, but we know that they haven't played particularly well or performed very well on home ice. But whatever the case, I think they'll take stock of where they are on this 6-game road trip, and it is a bunch of games that, in theory, they should have a chance to pick up points along the way.
Yeah, I think the first 3 games of this trip, if they do well, then they've got time. If they don't do well, then I think the urgency cranks. Awesome stuff. Jeff will be listening rink-wide tomorrow after the game against the Senators. Appreciate this. Until Monday.
All right, guys, have a great weekend.